Welcome, my friends, to the introductory episode to this new playlist on our YouTube channel, Teaching Unplugged. Now, let's talk about this name that might look a bit weird for some people who are not interested in methodology and the different ways and methods of teaching English. Now, Teaching Unplugged. And the question is, where does this name come from? And what do we mean by Teaching Unplugged? Now, first, let me show you this picture. So look at this. As you see, in this picture, we've got a guy playing the guitar. It's an electrical guitar, as the picture shows. And we see that the man is kind of sitting on the floor, very close to the wall. Why? Simply because the guitar is plugged in. And if the guitar is plugged in, it means that you're not free to move. You can't move freely as long as your guitar is plugged. And this is where the name Teaching Unplugged came from. Because people started to compare an English teacher to a guitarist. So if this guitarist is using an electrical guitar, then this guitarist is not free. And they said that the teacher is the same way. If the teacher is using a course book, he's not free. He can't move freely. He can't have his character clear in the classroom. He's not independent. So that's what they said. And they said that we want teaching to be unplugged. So that's why teaching without course books and without depending on heavy material and technology is called Teaching Unplugged. Because if your guitar is plugged, you're not free. But when it is unplugged, you're free to move. And so is the teacher without a course book. Right. Now, there is another name for Teaching Unplugged. And this name is Dogma Realty. The question is, where did this name Dogma Realty come from? And let me tell you about this. It came from the Dutch cinema industry. And to be very specific, this can be traced to these two directors. One of them is called Lars von Trier, and I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, and the other one is called Thomas Vinterberg. Now, these two decided to start a movement in the Danish cinema, and they called this movement Dogma 95. And they said that in this movement they want to get rid of the studios, and they want cinema to be simple again. They don't want to depend heavily on a studio. They want to shoot movies in their original location. So if there is a scene in a zoo, they go to the zoo. If there is a scene in a park, they go to the park. They don't want to depend too much on technology, too much on studios. And then our friend, the theoretician, the wonderful Professor Scott Thornberry here in the picture, found inspiration in this movement. And he began to think, why don't we have something like that in teaching? Why do we have to depend all the time on course books? And course books have supplementary material. And in the supplementary material, there are exams, and there are videos, and there is also a workbook, and there is. A lot of things are there. And these lots of things are on the teacher's shoulders. Overloading teaching, overloading the teacher, overloading students. And he wanted to get rid of all this. And let's go back to simplicity in teaching. And he started this movement in English language teaching called Dogma Realty, which is a kind of a copy of the idea of Dogma 95 in the Danish cinema. And I still remember, my friends, the conversation that I had with Scott Thornberry when I was doing my Delta with Cambridge Assessment English. I asked him and I said, I read some articles that actually talk about dogma, but the word dogma itself, the term dogma ELT was not mentioned, but it was clear that people were talking about it. And he said something that I don't forget. He said, Shadi, dogma is the D word in ELT. It's the word that no one says. And the reason, of course, I got it, is it was because publishing houses, of course, would hate an approach like this and a movement like this, because the movement says, forget about course books and let's put them aside and let's use light, very light material and depend on students' emergent language and the topics they choose. And this is something that, of course, would harm the business of course book publishing, for sure. And that's why he said in this conversation that we had together, that it's the D word. And I loved the term. I loved the term so much. Right, now, but what are the key principles of dogma ELT? And I would say there are 10 dogma key principles. Number one, interactivity, which means that in dogma, there has to be a lot of interaction between the teacher and the students and the students. So students need to talk together, interact together. They need to interact with the teacher and the teacher interacts with them. And this is how learning happens. And this is how people learn English. So principle number one in dogma is interactivity. Principle number two is engagement. So according to dogma ELT, students need to be engaged so that learning happens. And according also to dogma, this engagement comes when the students choose the topics they want to talk about. So these topics are not left for course books or course book writers. They're not left even for the teacher. They need to choose the topics they want to talk about and the topics they're interested in. Principle number three is dialogic processes. And according to dogma, dialogues are so important. There have to be conversations going on in the English classroom, discussions all the time, interaction all the time between students and the teacher and the students. Principle number four is the scaffolded conversations. And the scaffolded conversations are those conversations that the students have with help from the teacher. And this help comes in the picture of providing them with the language they need, the functional language that they need, maybe the vocabulary they need. And all this happens about topics that have been chosen by students. A very important principle is immersions, which is principle number 5. That it's not about language acquisition in dogma. No, it's about language immersions. It's about building your teaching around what the students say, not what you want them to acquire. It's about what comes from students' mouth. So you're there, you notice that the students are making a mistake in a specific area, and this is where you focus. This is where you provide them with help. Another principle is affordances. So the teacher needs to use all the affordances, all the learning opportunities that are offered in the lesson. And this is through emergent language. So I feel that my students, are suffering in this area. They cannot, for example, formulate maybe WH questions, so that's what I focus on. I noticed that they have a problem with if conditionals, that's what I focus on. I noticed that they have some problems with functional language in this area, and then this is what I focus on. And these are affordances, so you try to use opportunities that come up in your class. Another principle is voice. Whose voice? The learner's voice. Very recognized in dogma ELT. A lot of focus is there on a student's voice. opinion, students' choices, students' emergent language. Everything goes around students' voice. Another principle is empowerment. The teacher is empowered, students are empowered. Why? Because they have the freedom to choose. It's not a course book that is imposed on them. No, it's their choices. Together, students choose what they want to talk about, and the teacher supports them and come up with, ideas and activities and dialogues and all this. Another principle is relevance. And what I mean by this principle is that materials used by the teacher in the classroom must have relevance to students. So if Egyptians, love something, you try to bring it up in a classroom and talk about it. You don't bring them a topic that they're not interested in, they don't care about, they don't even like it, and decide to teach it just because it's in a course book. No. Everything has to be related to students' lives. And finally, critical use. So if you do have a course book and you don't want to get rid of it, then at least use it in a critical way. It's not to be taken as is. You need to take from it what is suitable to your culture, appropriate for your culture, and what you actually need, and ignore the other things that are not related to your culture, inappropriate to your culture, and don't suit you as a learner. So these are the 10 key principles of dogma. Now, what we intend to do in the coming episodes of this new playlist is to show you ideas related to dogma RELT, done in classes. So this will serve as a kind of an observation for you to see how you can teach without material or with very light material in the classroom. Some of these ideas, of course, will be taken from this great book by Scott Thornberry and Luke Meddings called Teaching Unplugged, right? And some other ideas will be taken from different books. Some other ideas will be generated by our Britishy team. Some other ideas will be taken from different resources, websites here and there. But all of them share one element: teaching without material, teaching without course books, and wonderful ideas for you to use in your classes. So I hope that you would enjoy this new playlist, my friends. Thank you for watching. This was Shadi Abu Yusuf, and as usual, I'll be down there in the comments if you have any questions. Bye-bye.